Hello, I'm the middle-aged revolutionary, and welcome back to another chapter in our review of Paul Embery's book, Despised: Why the Modern Left Loathes the Working Class. And joining me again for the third time is my friend and comrade, Terry. Terry, good evening and welcome.
Evening, Jason. Pleased
How,
to see you again.
yeah, good to see you too. It's
Yep.
been a while for those of you watching. It's been a while since we recorded our last
Yeah.
episode. And in going through chapter 3 of the book, we realized that it was quite a task to get through it all, perhaps in just one episode of this stream. So what we're going to do, we're going to probably split this into two in and of itself. So part 3 and part 4 of our book review will be solely around just chapter 3. And chapter 3 is a new national religion, liberal wokedom. And before I go into what the chapter's all about, which you could probably glean from the title anyway, but it should be said that we are talking about a book that was written a little over 3 years ago. And I think it's fair to say that the wokedom that Paul Embery was writing about then is not as prevalent now. I don't think after 3 years. I think there are certain things that are less outside of that very narrow set of beliefs that can be spoken about in certain sections. Not all sections, but certain sections. But wokedom is still with us, and I think it's still worth going through this chapter. And there are lots of things to talk about. So what I'll do is I'll just bring you up to speed on what the chapter's about, and then we'll plow into each part of the chapter in turn. So
Mhm.
in this chapter, Paul Embery examines the collapse of the modern left into the woke hellscape that is identity politics, the total abandonment of class-based politics in favour of the pursuit of victimhood and emancipation based on clearly delineated lines of protected characteristics. Embery also shows how the liberal left is in fact the most illiberal sect in society, condemning nonconformists to being cancelled, losing their livelihoods, and being cast from civil society for the smallest transgressions. So, Terry, you were saying earlier on about what wokedom and what being woke means to you. So, when you hear the word woke, what does it mean to you?
Um, well, definitely identity politics. That's something that came out of it. Everything that they're talking about, woke, to me, is anti what I believe in over the years about class. Um, all these things are designed, to me, to split us as a class, whether it's black against white, gay against straight, trans against straight, gay, whatever. It's all designed, to me, to split a class. Now, and the examples in this chapter, there's so many. I mean, every page you could find something that, I was pulling my hair out and thinking, this is ridiculous. Things that they say. I mean, you'll come on to it later, but our friend Lammy raises his head again when he called I say my friend Lammy, but I think he's one of the most stupidest men I've seen representing a political party on TV. I have to say that. I haven't got nothing against him as a man, but I just think he's a complete pillock. And to call Tories Nazis just because they wanted Brexit is like, where are you coming from, mate?
It's
They're not
ridiculous, isn't it?
Nazis. We might not like them, but they're not
Yeah.
fucking Nazis, are they?
Well, I mean, I haven't, I won't claim to have come across many MPs in my time, but as you know, I used to be the national officer of a trade union, so I've come across quite a few MPs in my time.
Yeah.
And one of the things that sticks out in my mind, and I'm thinking of specific MPs when I make this statement, some MPs are incredibly stupid.
Mm,
They are
I agree.
really stupid people. They come from probably backgrounds where they have very little life experience, certainly very little working class experience. They don't really come from working class areas. They don't really have much contact with working class people. Um, they're They're often bewildered by things that you and I might take for granted. And their worldview is really strange. It speaks to me as a collection of people who have very little life experience, very little, experience of the real world.
Yeah,
The
they
ups
don't.
and downs
Yeah,
and things like that.
yeah, they're not representative of us, and if they and woke seems to force them to be terrified to upset people. Now, this was never the case in the past. Nobody gave a monkeys about who you upset. I mean, as long as you're not going to, malign their health or something like that. But just as an individual in an argument, if you got upset when I was young about someone calling you a bad name, then you're in the wrong game, mate, as
Yeah,
being a union official,
yeah,
because you just might as well, throw it in. But now they seem to get upset if I watched them on TV shows until I stopped watching them. Question Time, that went a long time ago. Any speeches, they are terrified of upsetting people, whether it be gender fluidity, whatever that means, whether it be you can't say black, you can't say coloured, you can't. Do you know which way do you go round? And we'll come to that in a minute when we get on to if we
yeah.
get on to
Cool.
today, Martin Luther King. But yeah, it's beyond me, to be honest. It is not something that I can grasp.
Yeah.
Wokeness.
Yes. Well, let's see if we can grasp it together going through this chapter. So
I'll
we'll
need
start
your help.
with page 95 of chapter 3. And just by way of scene setting, Embery sets out what's been happening. So Labour, this is at the time he's writing this particular chapter. Labour have backed a Brexit motion, which included within it the maintenance of free movement. That's of goods, people, money, and services. Now, Embery, it should be said, is an opponent of free movement and tweeted that this was an utter betrayal of working class people, which the woke liberal left took to mean working class and white people in their responses to him. So I'll quote directly from the book now. It plainly didn't occur to these critics that in deciding that nobody who did not have white skin could ever be considered part of Britain's traditional working class, not even those who had lived most or all of their lives here, they were laying bare their prejudices. Their minds were made up. Traditional working class could only meet white folk. Opponents of free movement were racist and worthy of a Twitter storm. Now, I've seen, and I obviously follow Embery on Twitter, and I've seen a lot of the exchanges he's had with people, and it is often the case that people who reply to him imply somehow that he's, if not an overt, out and out racist, then certainly he's edging into out and out racist territory. Like I said, when he was talking about betraying working class people, a lot of the replies that were coming back, and I did check the tweet itself. A lot of the people have come back. You mean working class white people, don't you? He never said that. He never
No.
said working class white people.
Yeah. Well, that's
And
the point.
it also implies, and this is something that the modern left seems to have done over Brexit, is to imply that there was a certain very strict demographic that voted for Brexit. That is white and racist, basically. There's not really many more characteristics beyond that they'll either countenance or understand. It was white racists who voted for Brexit. Whereas the truth of the matter is there were a lot of people of colour who voted to leave the European Union. There was a lot of working class people that voted to leave the European Union. And just those two core facts are things that the mid-liberal left don't want to deal with. The idea that white people were the only cohort of the working class who voted for Brexit is frankly ridiculous and doesn't get borne out by the facts. The reaction of the Twitter sphere to Embery's tweet shows the deep-seated soft bigotry of the liberal left. They can't conceive of working class people who are not only not white but would also vote for Brexit. And
that in
we
itself
also
is
forgot,
racist.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, the idea that someone like myself as a trade unionist for 30 years and someone like yourself as a trade unionist for longer were racist because we both voted for Brexit is ludicrous.
Correct.
It's absolutely ludicrous. You know, for anyone to believe that by remaining in the European Union, we'll come onto the European Union and it's, I wouldn't say links to fascism, but it's alignment with fascism at times later on. But the idea that to remain in the European Union it was somehow striking a blow for racial equality is absolutely bonkers as well, isn't it?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, he also forgot the fact that non-whites have been an integral part of the working class for decades,
Yeah, that's it.
which
Class.
they have. You know.
That's the class. The working class.
Yes.
We
Yes.
see that. It's those people who they bear their prejudices by saying, oh, the working class you must mean the white working class. Well, why? Is there a white working class and a black working class who work separately? I've never seen that.
Yeah.
I've seen black and white working in factories together.
Yeah. Exactly.
So
Yeah.
but it's not us that we're accused of this, but it isn't us, is it? It's these woke liberals.
Yeah. So we'll move on because he's going to talk now of a similar vein regarding an experience he had when he was in Brighton. And I quote from the book: I had a similar experience a few months later at the Labour Party's annual conference in Brighton. While waiting to do an interview at the Sky News Live Point in the conference centre, I got to talking to a 30-something woman alongside me. Oh, you're that guy, she said after I introduced myself. The one who keeps going on about working class values. We attempted an exchange of views during which I had tried to explain why working class voters in our party's traditional heartlands, such as those I had grown up with in Barking and Dagenham, felt so alienated. But she didn't seem impressed. If you mean white people, you should just say white people, she grumbled before we parted company. She was, by the way, a member of parliament.
Right.
And to me, this anecdote neatly captures the modern liberal left. The idea that anyone could or would make reference to the working class and by that mean only the white cohort is bonkers. Bonkers. It's absolutely mad. It also suggests that liberal leftists can only see the working class or only see working class people as white.
Mm.
Which begs the question: if only white people could be working class, what class are non-white people who have to sell their labour to live?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and this is what comes of having a lack of class consciousness, isn't it?
Yes.
You don't see people in terms of they have to sell their labour to live. They own the means of production.
Mm.
It's they're black, they're white. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. And there's no distinction between a black person who owns the means of production and a black person who has to sell their labour to live, and a white person who owns the means of production and a white person who has to sell their labour to live.
Mm.
And I think that. Well, obviously these people are just going to prop up the capitalist system anyway, aren't they? But it doesn't help people like us when people in power, like this MP that Embery mentions, just think that all Embery's talking about is white working class, when he's just talking about all working class.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That was a hard thing for me to get my head around that someone would say that who was an MP,
yeah,
an actual MP, segregated black from white
mm,
in
yeah,
that comment to him,
yeah.
and that's something that you as a trade unionist and me as a trade unionist is something that we would never ever do,
Of course not. I mean, you and I
and it
both
would come second nature that we just
we've both been, call it reps, call it shop stewards, call it whatever you want, conveners, whatever. We've represented people at all sorts of levels, and they have been all sorts of people.
yeah.
And there's no distinction made. They're usually, excuse me, they're usually people who've got themselves into a spot of bother,
Yeah.
and you need to get them out of it. And you don't. It's a member,
Yeah.
it's a colleague, it's a comrade. You do your best for them, and that's it.
That's it.
The idea that you would distinguish between one or the other. Now, don't get me wrong, trade unions have shown that they have made distinctions between white people and non-white people, but I don't believe that's been done by the shop stewards at the shop stewards level. If there has, I'd like to hear evidence of it. But I think of things like the Imperial Typewriters strike back in the 1970s, where the Transport and General Workers Union did treat the Indian workers worse than they treated the white workers in the same dispute. But that's a bureaucrat, or that's a bureaucratic level prejudice, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not necessarily a rank and file.
No, it's not.
But we'll lead on from Embery's anecdote to talk about the MP that thought the working class people were all white. So he says, it is the product of an unwavering belief among many of its activists, by it he means the modern left, in their own moral rightness, the certainty that their own views are so correct that they ought to be considered receive wisdom, and where necessary enforced through legislation, and that alternative standpoints are inherently wrong and those who express them worthy of opprobrium. So one of the things I've noted, and you know, his reputation has sort of eluded him of late, Boris Johnson. But one of the things that Boris Johnson said that I thought was notable was that the key difference between the conservatives, small c conservatives, and leftists was that conservatives looked at leftists and their views and thought that while they were wrong, they were still decent people. Whereas leftists look at conservatives and think not only are they wrong, they're evil. And it's not possible for them to reconcile that a conservative is a person just like them, has the same, probably the same life goals as them, same wants, same desires, you know, same things that they want to do well in. But because they're conservative, they're evil. And I would argue that the definition of leftist could be extended to anyone who steps out of their rigid and extremely narrow set of beliefs that make up their worldview. So basically, Embery is something of an outlier on the left, isn't he? Because he talks about class issues.
Yeah.
He talks about immigration. Now, we can have a debate about the whys and the wherefores about immigration. After all, the last episode we did of this review was over a chapter that's completely about immigration.
Yeah.
But he is a man of the left who is not, I wouldn't say a pariah, but he's something of an outlier because he talks about things that the modern left doesn't want to talk about, doesn't he?
No, that's right. He does.
Yeah. And it's not only the idea that they don't agree with him, they round on him every time he says something slightly controversial. So I remember, and I think he mentioned this before in a podcast we recorded together, along with a couple of other guys when we was in the Workers' Party. He did a tweet where he said it might be an idea that we go beyond talking about the minimum wage and we talk about, I can't remember the term of reference he used. He might have been the family wage. So what he wanted was a minimum wage set at a level where one single breadwinner could support a family. Now, he never said whether it be the man or the woman. He just said one of the heads of the household can earn a wage that can run the family. And all these leftists come out of nowhere and say, "Oh, I suppose you want the woman to be, you know, chained to the
kitchen sink." Yeah,
exactly. And it's like, but he never said that. He
I
never
know.
said that. Oh, but well, that was what he meant. Well, there's no evidence to suggest that that's
clearly
true.
he didn't mean that, did he?
No.
It's their ideology. It's what they think. They put in people's mouths what they've decided what Embery was what we are.
Yeah.
They've decided already. So whenever you're in a conversation, you're a fascist. That's one of the things I get.
Yeah.
And you know, that's what you get. You know, oh yes, Brexit, you've ruined my children's future. Well, I've got a child, he's 24. I haven't ruined his future. He's doing all right for himself. The point is, we had a decision to make. We made it. Now we're not horrible people. And I find Boris Johnson's comment, I found that quite correct, because I have met some Tories. In fact, there was one in Batley. I was on the telling with her, we got conversing about the different parties, and the only difference she said between us, really, between what you want and what we want, is you don't like our leader, and we can't stand yours, which was Galloway at the time. And I said, yeah, but you're never going to become Labour. You're never going to leave the Tory. But no, she says, and neither are you going to ever join the Tories. But it doesn't mean that we can't agree on issues. And it's
Yeah,
right.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
And we did
absolutely.
agree on issues.
Yeah.
I don't believe that every Tory should be strung up and thrown in the river. Some of them should, or maybe you shouldn't say that, but perhaps they deserve it. But they're not on their own. There's some in the Labour Party as well
Yeah, yeah,
that are equally
exactly.
as bad.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose coming back to the point that Embry was making when he was talking about this family wage, was the idea was that it would allow one person to go to work and earn enough money to raise the whole household, or to sustain the whole household, I should say, and allow the other parent to raise the children. Now, it doesn't imply that has to be the mother or the
No.
father. It's just one of them. And the implication I got from the left, and I'm not saying it's the entire left, it's not some monolith, of course, but when I'm talking about a lot of the leftists, who, let's be honest, there is a certain ilk of leftists who focuses in on people like Paul Embery because they think he's basically a bigot. But the only question I would put to them is, do you actually think then it is acceptable that two parents have to work to sustain a reasonable standard of life in Britain in 2024? Now, I understand that there was a period, and it wasn't as long a period as people might think, but there was a period, probably of around 20 to 30 years, where it was usually the man was able to go out to work while mum would stay at home and raise the kids.
Yeah, that's how I was brought up.
Yeah,
in the
same here,
50s.
same here. But that has died out. That has gone,
Yeah.
and it wasn't totally 100% prevalent when it was more prevalent. There were still families where both parents still worked. But the idea that someone comes along, forget the people involved, let's say a person comes along and says, I believe that we should enact laws that allow one parent to raise children, to allow the other one to stay at home, or one to go to work and one to raise children, I should say. And for that to be an incorrect position, and then to attack him as a sexist, is absolutely ridiculous.
Yes.
But that is where we are with the modern left in well, it wasn't 2024 then at the time. I think it was about 2022. I think he mentioned that. It might have been earlier still. But this is the problem we got in the modern left, isn't it? You know, the idea that even things that on their face are progressive are shot down because they don't fit into a very narrow set of beliefs.
Exactly.
So let's have a look. So top of page 97, sorry, beg your pardon. So just by way of setting the scene, Embery sets the scene by detailing that society, most starkly in the modern left, has disappeared down the rabbit hole of identity politics. And I quote, much of our governing class is in the grip of this ideology. The political right, for all its posturing and pretense at being anti-PC, has not only succumbed to it, the right has its own influential liberal progressives, of course, but it is in part responsible for its spread. Certainly the upsurge in identity politics has occurred under recent governments of all political hues and without any noticeable attempts by any of them to check it. And by way of reflection, the closest link, I think, between the government and the masses is through its agents. So it's things like the NHS, the police, the judiciary, also journalism, media generally, academia as well. And it's obvious to anyone who's been following the news over the last few years that arguably nowhere in the public sphere has identity politics taken a greater hold than in these agencies. So it's all those, the police, the judiciary, the media, academia, and so on. Identity politics, which is bourgeois, I'm going to say that now, it's bourgeois ideology. It's designed by the ruling class to atomize the working class.
Yes.
is pushed forward at every level in public services, but also every level of major commerce. And the example that I would give, and I don't know if they did it in the last Pride month in June just gone, but certainly the one before last year, where Mercedes-Benz's Twitter account, if you looked at the European Twitter account, the Mercedes-Benz was done in rainbow colours, and then the Saudi Arabian Mercedes account was not.
Absolutely.
And it's all performative.
Wonder why.
It's all performative. It's
Yeah.
all performative. You know, the bigger the company, the more likely it is to be ideologically captured, for want of a better phrase, by identity politics.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. It
you
is.
know,
So,
and I think the point that Embry's making, and I think it's a point that I tend to agree with, is that it really doesn't matter who's in charge. The Tories were in charge more or less from 2010 to July just gone, last month. And all of these things that he's written about, all these pervasive ideologies have infected things like the police, like the judiciary, like the media, like academia, like
yeah.
journalism, and so on. And it's all happened on the Tories' watch.
Mm.
It's all happened on the Tories' watch. They knew it was happening, and it happened anyway. And in fact, there's quite a lot of Tory MPs, or at least there were until last month when the election happened, where a lot of them got booted out.
Mm.
But there are a lot of, or there were a lot of Tory MPs who are all in on this. They're all
Yeah.
in on the identity politics. You know, I've said before that there are lots of Tory MPs who are absolutely no different from the Labour benches. They could
Oh,
quite
they could
easily
mingle.
interchange.
Yeah.
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 Their politics is compatible with both
Yeah.
sides.
Definitely.
Compatible with both sides. So, I mean, what's your thoughts on governments allowing this sort of pervasive ideology to take hold?
I can't understand why they did allow it. Only the fact that it would cause as he says here, or he might say later on, a bomb was exploded with regard to some other things that they've said or allowed to happen. It's once again, it brings us back to us arguing amongst ourselves with this identity politics. You know, somebody says something, and it's, oh, we can't have that. We can't allow that because that offends. But it hasn't offended me. I'm watching the guy. I don't think he's just making a point of view. Say it's Embry, and I think his points of views in this chapter in particular are correct.
Mm.
And I do agree with you there that they did know what was going on, the Tories. Now, whether they knew they weren't going to get another term of office. They thought they were on the way out. So let the Labour Party sort all this out when they get elected, because that's what's going to have to happen. But whilst they were doing all this, the Labour Party wasn't fighting them. The trade union leaders weren't fighting them.
No, no.
You know, it's they're all in it together.
They're all in on it. Yeah, exactly. Because in essence, those Tory MPs, those Labour MPs, those trade union bureaucrats, the journalists, the senior police officers, the judiciary, and so on, they're all basically the same people, aren't they?
Yes.
They're all basically the same people. They're all from the same stock. They're all cut from the same cloth. So it was impossible that anyone in any of those positions was ever going to say, no, I'm not accepting this. I'm not accepting identity politics.
No, no, exactly, because they're all part of the same. What if you want a cohort? If you want,
Yeah,
they all piss in the same pot, to quote a northern
they all
phrase.
piss in the same pot. Absolutely. Yeah, you're right. Let's move on then. Let's go to page 97, and it's Embry now talking on the subject of the left resorting to identity politics. And I quote: "It is a sad reality that much of today's left seems interested less in fighting for the class, working class, and more in pursuing struggles according to biological characteristics, sexual orientation, or religion of a particular section of society. Little wonder that Britain's working class movement is increasingly fragmented and disjointed. The whole philosophy of identity politics demands that minority groups be seen as inherent victims, regardless of material circumstances of individuals, and that it must fall to society's progressives to protect them from the oppression of the so-called privileged majority. And I remember a while back there was a person on Twitter saying that he was talking about white privilege. And he was a British guy, he wasn't an American. So that obviously white privilege has really, or the principle of white privilege has really taken hold amongst some sections in the American political class. But this was a bloke from over here talking about it. And the response I gave to him is much like the response that someone like Paul Embery would give, which is, where's the white privilege for a white working class person living in a place like Boston in Lincolnshire, or perhaps Lowestoft in Suffolk? You know, where's the white privilege for a guy who lives in Merthyr Tydfil, for instance?
Mm.
What benefits do they get from being white when they live in poor working class areas like that? You know, I mean, the point made by Embry brings us again back to the class composition of the modern left, and it's that they're in the main, they're either upper working class or they're middle class.
Hmm.
That's it. There's very, very little actual working class activism within the modern left in 2024, is there?
No.
Because I mean, one of the things I've noted down here was having a long conversation with a comrade in my old trade union, and he knew he was from middle class stock, and he was actually quite embarrassed about it. And you know, at the time I was the treasurer of my union. I was a national officer, and maybe he'd had a few. He had been on the wine all night, but he was going on about, you know, how not ashamed he was of his middle class background, but certainly that he wished it were different. He wished he had come from a slightly more humble beginning, shall we say?
Yeah.
But yeah, what are your thoughts on that passage, Terry, of the book regarding the left's total adherence now to identity politics?
You specifically talking about white privilege.
Well, I mean, it was a point. So he mentions about the
oh yeah, well,
society's progressives protect them from the oppression of the so-called privileged majority.
Yeah, well, he is talking about white privilege, isn't he? I think he comes on to that later specifically.
Yeah.
Why do minority groups have to be victims? Do they see themselves as victims? Now, if you could, I could supposedly look at that, the trans issue, which we can, agree or disagree. They're a small minority, but the left wing have jumped on this and defending them right to the hilt, and I don't know why. If a man wants to be a woman, well, good luck. Don't include me, but that's up to them. But there's other groups that are smaller than the white group. So why are they victims? Because they come from Pakistan, Bangladesh, Jamaica, Ireland, Poland. It might, they've been Polish people living in Ellesmere Port for years.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'll go back to the point I made a little while ago, which is that there are sections in the modern left who don't make a distinction between a black person who owns the means of production and a black person who has to work to live. They think that they are from the same strata. I wouldn't say class, because if they did look at class, they would look at that person as part of the ruling class and that person as part of the working class.
That's why they don't.
Even though that's why they don't. That's why they don't. And it's either because they know about class and choose to ignore it, or they genuinely don't know about class.
Well, I'd say it was the former, because they can't not know about class. It's impossible not to know, but to choose to slant the agenda, to slant the argument to suit their agenda is what they do. So that what you've said, they would put the black owner and the black worker in the same category. They're black, and they would see a difference between the white owner and the white worker. He would be working class. They'd just be black people.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's now a leftist would say, well, that's incorrect because we agree with all people. Well, if they agreed with all people, then there would be no class distinction.
Yeah.
So why would an MP say to Embery, if you're talking about white people, say white people, which he clearly wasn't. He was talking about all people, men and women.
Yep.
There's another division in class,
Yes.
not just between, black and white. There's men and women. Let's split us again. Let's we've stopped blaming the Irish now because all that's gone away. Well, it hasn't.
Yes.
It's still going on, but that's gone away. Who can we find now to cause mayhem? So they pick on Muslims. Let's go and cause them to cause mayhem. Let's blame it all on them. There's another division of the class.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're not helping the situation by defending sort of brutality by the police.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not having that. I don't agree with brutality by the police on anyone. It doesn't matter what colour they are, or what sex they are, or what sex they think they are.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, there's still a campaign to get justice for the victims at the Battle of Orgreave. I mean, we're talking about
Yeah.
nearly 40 years ago now.
Yeah.
That was one of the most blatant filmed and televised on ITN examples of police brutality you'll ever see.
But they ignored it for years and years and years. And in the 70s, just going off topic a minute, but in the 70s, the brutality at football games by the police was unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
The way that the fans were treated.
Yeah.
Well, if you're going away and talk about kettling and block bottling, that was done to me in the early 70s following Man United. And so I know all about that. And police horses and just baton. Let's batten them. And we're just fans going to a football game. We weren't all hooligans.
Yeah.
There were hooligans. There always are. Like there's some bad in every group of people. They're not all perfect, but they're certainly not all bad.
No, that's right. And it's
black and white.
I mean, those two examples, I'm sure we can think of more between us, but
definitely.
Those two examples, like the more general example of football hooliganism and how it was dealt with in the 70s and the 80s. In fact, not football hooliganism, that's wrong. How football supporters were treated by the police in the 70s and 80s, and then how the striking miners were treated at Orgreave. The common thread is that they were all working class.
Correct.
And the police put the boot in because the powers that be always actively from day one encourage policemen to put the boot in on working class people because they just cause trouble.
Yeah, well, that's it. And that's what you had the nation then divided between football supporters who to people who didn't follow football, they were just a bunch of hooligans. It's been no different, Jace. Mods and rockers when I was a kid growing up. Then you had skinheads, and then you've got, and there was all kinds of things. But in the end, they've all been infiltrated and put in the minds of people to split our class. All these things are just there. The police are just a tool of the ruling class. We know this. Yeah. Orgreave was an example, but no difference in Northern Ireland. The way that they brutalised people there and put them in the maze, diplock courts. They want them. They'd like to have them over here for these rioters.
I'm sure they would.
Let's open the diplock courts again. We'll have one judge and throw you in jail for 100 years.
Yeah, that's it.
I don't know what they're going to find anywhere to put them.
Well, that's it, apparently. Yeah.
They're going to let all the rapists out early and child molesters and put in some rioters in the place.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense to me.
Including one woman whose name I can't remember, but she was apparently sentenced to 2 years in prison for wheeling an industrial wheelie bin at some police.
Oh, yeah, I saw that on Twitter. On Facebook.
2 years for that.
Yeah, there's a 67-year-old man I saw was chanting, you're not something anymore. You're not right anymore to the police. He got 27 or 24 months for chanting.
Yeah.
Now, he might have done something else that we don't know about, but Christ almighty, if they'd have done this when we were striking in the 70s, we would have been in jail for a long time.
I mean, well, if you think back to how strikes were in the 70s, I would wager that if you applied the law of today to then, if you apply the law from 2024 in 1974, most strikers have been banged up for 2 years now.
There's been no one working in the country.
Lest we forget, look what happened to the Shrewsbury 24.
Exactly. And look at the time it took them to get the exoneration. Half of them are dead.
Half of them were dead. Yeah, exactly.
including Desi Warren, who was brutalised in jail because he refused to accept his punishment.
Yeah,
exactly. He said he was a political prisoner, and he was.
And he was. The powers that be dusted off an old Act of Parliament that had never been used and sent them down using it.
Yeah, the Conspiracy Act.
The Conspiracy Act. That's right. Yeah, exactly.
It's the same. We've spoke about this before. That's the same as the dockers, the Pentonville Five.
Yeah.
Who they in the middle of the night they found the special, was his name the special solicitor or
special solicitor, someone that never existed before and didn't exist again after.
Didn't exist after. The man came in, got him released, and then disappeared into oblivion.
I think Harold Wilson just invented it overnight.
He did, yeah.
Got them off, let them out, and then abolished the post straight away.
Exactly.
It's amazing what the ruling class would do when they have to, isn't it? Amazing.
Well, yeah, when they have to.
Exactly. So let's return to the matter at hand. We'll go back to identity politics, and I'll quote again from page 98 of the chapter. It is an ideology that conflicts sharply with the values of those who led past struggles against discrimination, including arguably the finest among them, Martin Luther King, who famously spoke of his desire to live in a society that judged a man not by the colour of his skin, but by the content of his character. And, I would argue, and have argued indeed, that if Martin Luther King said that, if he was around today, of course, and he said that today, there would have been some who might have accused him of being a racist.
Yeah.
If you follow the edicts of critical race theory, it goes against exactly what Martin Luther King said then. In fact, it's got absolutely nothing to do with the contents of someone's character. It's all to do with the colour of their skin.
But it's there again, you see, as you say, it's something else to put in there to divide us. Yes. Let's invent something else just to make a black person feel marginalised.
Yes.
Not only do they have to put them in, when they're coming into the country, like we talked about with Barking and Dagenham, and just put them all into one working class area and say, right, you can all live there, and then they make them into a ghetto. And it wasn't the people that wanted to be living in ghetto. It was the governments that put people in areas that they knew that's what would happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look at well, a good example. It's not in Britain, but a good example of a city that's been completely ghettoized over the decades is Paris. Paris has got, obviously, like any major city, a big ethnic minority, but they all live on the very edges of the city.
Yeah.
No one lives, or no one of ethnicity seems to live in the very centre of Paris. They all live in the suburbs, and those suburbs have been run down. The police are quite brutal. Anyone who's had any contact with French police, especially if they went to a football match or two, will know what the French Old Bill are like. And that's why you often get these outbreaks of violence in Paris. It's because they burst open, like we saw in Britain just a week or so ago. These tensions explode uncontrollably because the people who live in these enclaves have had enough of whatever it is that's causing their tension, be it extreme poverty, lack of services, police brutality, all of those things together. And those things are happening. And London's starting to get like that. London's starting to do that. I think it was most noticeable, or it started to get noticeable rather, when Boris Johnson was the mayor. And working class people who would live in council estates that are actually not that far from central London. You're talking about no more than a mile or two from central London, were being priced out of the area by the rising cost of living, the running down of what little council housing stock there was in the hands of housing associations, and being pushed out to the periphery of London. And the housing in central London is owned by huge property development companies and very rich private individuals, so that working class people can't live there anymore and will never be able to come back.
No.
And so what you're doing, you're pushing them out to the periphery, and you're going to cause a situation just like what happens in Paris. Every few years, there'll be an outburst of violence because people who live in these enclaves are fed up with the situation that they're having to deal with.
And so right.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to change tack slightly. We're gonna look at the privileges that university educated people used to get and used to enjoy, but in the main no longer do, and how this manifests itself in the worldview of these people. So I'll quote from the book. Nowadays, however, largely as a consequence of an economic landscape which hinders material advancement as well as the upsurge in the numbers across all classes going to university, many struggle to demarcate themselves from the working class in any material sense and hold out little hope of being able to do so in the future. So, displaying an educated and militant progressiveness in cultural and sociological issues, and doing so in a way that enables them to be identified as a member of a group or similarly enlightened people, has, for those who have given up on material advancement or simply don't care about it, become an alternative method of distinguishing themselves from the less educated masses while showing that they remain on the right side of politics. And I think one of the things that Paul Embery's driving at in that particular passage of the book is the fact that there was a time where going to university was a pathway, or gateway is a better word. It's a gateway to a more materially successful life
Yes.
than someone who didn't go to university, in simple terms. So
Yeah.
by going to university and getting a degree or wherever it was, you were able to then enter the workplace at a much higher level than someone like myself who left school at 16.
Yeah.
But over the years, given the number of factors, including that, and I know Paul Embery's talked about this, not necessarily in this chapter, but I think he does talk about it in other parts of the book. And he's also talked about it through his social media output and so on. He believes too many people are going to university.
Yeah.
In simple terms. And that's a point of view, in simple terms, I agree with.
Yeah.
But over the years, as the net benefit of going to university has been eroded, so that two people, one being university educated and one not, could go for the same job and probably have a pretty much equal chance of getting it.
Yeah.
Or to put it another way, two people doing roughly the same job in the same office, one being university educated and one not, they would earn more or less the same salaries.
Yeah.
So there's no benefit. But there's a certain ilk of person who is university educated who can't get that advancement that they used to get. So they set themselves apart from non-university educated people by adopting a certain worldview that's different to what most working class people do.
Yeah.
And there's no more different working worldview than identity politics, is there?
Yeah.
You know, there's no world. I mean, you know, I don't often find myself talking to working class people, and the identity politics comes into the field of discussion.
Exactly.
Certainly
Exactly.
don't happen to me.
No.
And I don't think
No.
you see many people in, you know, local pubs up and down the country where working class people still go to sit and talking about identity politics. It just doesn't have any resonance with the working class, does it?
No, definitely not. Definitely not indeed. In
No.
the people in the past, when I was growing up, and you decided you were going to go to the sixth form, and it was a pathway to, you wanted to be a teacher or a doctor or something of such. And for the rest of us who were not as bright, perhaps, um, would go down the apprenticeship route and become a carpenter or an electrician or a tool fitter, or as like Keir Starmer's dad, a toolmaker.
A toolmaker,
Yeah.
allegedly.
Anyway, or that, but they don't exist anymore for kids leaving school. You know, well, they do, but they're not the same as it was a 4-year apprenticeship, and then you're on crap money, but you're learning the trade from a tradesman. Then when you come out your time, you are a tradesman, and you can hold your head up high. You're entitled to have more cash because you've got a trade. That's how it was when I was young.
Yes.
And the rest of us would be in a factory. You'd have welders, electricians, you know, tradesmen, and there'd be us, who were basically, you'd call them labourers. They weren't on the same grade, and neither should they be, because they've studied for 4 years to get where they are. And it's the same with you. But now you can probably go and get a degree if you're apt enough to get a degree in skipping, or maybe something of that nature, tiddlywinks. I don't know. probably you could find some kind of course that would let you in on it. It seems to me that every politician has a law degree, so they must be easy to do because
That's
for them,
funny. Yeah, it must be actually, especially when you
me
look
and
at
you
some
should
of
go
the
for one
hiccos
of them.
I've dealt with as MPs. My goodness.
Exactly. So I wouldn't want one of them representing me in court.
No, nor would I. Nor would I. No. And
But they've got a law degree as a means to an end. They get an MP's job, and
exactly. Yeah.
then they'll fall back on the law degree and do other things within whatever.
Yeah,
If they got
exactly.
sacked off as the MP.
Well, well, that's it. It's something to fall back on, isn't it? I mean, the point you made earlier on is absolutely right, though. It's about, and again, if you don't agree with what I'm going to say, do post in the comments. But I get the impression now that young people today, whereas when I left school in 1989, you made your mind up in the last couple of years, maybe last year of your time at school, about where you were going to go, what career you wanted to try to attain. And then you would then set out your pathway. So it would be like, right, let's say I want to become a doctor. Okay, so I've got to firstly stay on, do my A levels. Then I've got to try and get into university. Then I've got to get a degree at university. Then I've got to go to medical school, and all that's my path. I get the impression these days it's almost like the other way around. You get kids who are going into university, still no idea what they want to do, or where they want to go, or what they want to be. And then come out of the arse end of the university system with a degree that's practically worthless, and go into the labour market maybe 4, 5 or 6 years behind someone who left school when they were 16, or I think it's 18.
Absolutely.
Legally.
And that's
But that's the problem, isn't it?
That's the point and the problem. Because when you make your choice now, I turn on personal experience with my son. I said to him, there is no major industry for you to go into around here where we live now. If you moved away, I still doubt you. The car factories are failing. We've got no coal mines. We don't have any steel works. We've got no shipbuilding. You won't get a job doing that, even if there's 100 jobs. They're not going to replace them. It's dying. So what you're going to have to do is, if you leave school, you're going to have to go and work in a shop, go and work in a pub. Maybe you get a job in the NHS, a porter in an hospital, which is a decent job. Or maybe you could go on the railways and work in the ticket office or whatever. You know what I mean? But it's not the career that you wanted if as it was in the olden days, to say. So they decided to go to university. Now my lad did a sports coaching degree, and he got his degree. He went to America, and I won't keep you with all this, but he went to America and he worked in. He could have got a job in the University of Colorado, but COVID came and they all had to come home. But he did get a teaching job in Moscow after, so he went there and taught for a bit there. And once again, the war came. I said to him, next time you're going abroad to do any work, tell everyone, because wherever you go, it's a disaster. Did COVID in America and a war in bloody Russia. Now, he would have gone back to Russia. He liked it. He liked it there. He said the people are lovely. The cost of living's good. Everything was cheaper, and people were friendly. Doctors were cheap. I'm not blowing up Russia. I'm just saying that this is what he found. And in America, he said people were far behind us educationally.
Yes, that's
in
true.
in their universities. But he did nearly a year in Colorado, and he liked it. So he has got a bit of experience. But he's come back and he's gone into. He wants to be a social worker, which I suppose working with children, which I suppose is something. It's a bit like his degree at coaching and football, sports sort of thing. You can get them into that. But some of his friends have got degrees in bookkeeping, or what's this one? Life studies. What the fuck?
What the hell's that?
I don't know.
That's
Where would you get a job doing that?
Yeah.
So anyway, but you've got a degree, and it shows that you've got I suppose that you've got the wherewithal to get one, if you like. But I do wonder sometimes whether degrees are devalued because of the amount that they just throw out and the money that they make with the student loans and all this business, and then they've got to get accommodation and what have you.
Yeah.
The rip-off landlords in these student towns that will charge them exorbitant prices because they know they're getting it paid off a bursary if they're working class.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's just as it's not like it was in my day, but nothing is.
But no, what you just said there though is absolutely right. There was a time not that long ago where to a prospective employer, almost what the degree was in didn't matter. It was that you
Yes.
had the diligence
Yeah.
and the wherewithal to work hard over a period of years to get that degree. But now, like you said, there are so many degrees that are frankly worthless, aren't they?
Yeah. I think
And
so.
it's devalued the whole. I mean, obviously there are certain degrees that will still carry a certain degree of weight in certain professions, of course. But I remember having an argument with someone a while back about professions like nurses and policemen needing degrees. Now, to me, a nurse is a vocational job.
Yeah.
It's a job that you can learn on the job. In fact, you probably learn more on the job than you'd ever learn in a classroom.
Yeah.
And police officers, sorry, I should say, police officers apparently now have to get a degree to become a police officer, where you just went to Hendon and got trained on how to clump working class people over the head with a truncheon. You know? But the problem is, and let's be clear, the idea of nurses needing a degree stems from the Blair government. The Blair government put that
Yeah.
stipulation on, and his government was part of a concerted effort to push huge numbers of people into the university system for no readily apparent reason.
Well,
You know, they didn't know exactly why they were doing it.
I suppose from their point of view, it was, well, they're not unemployed.
Well, yeah,
They're not on
they've
the
all used that.
unemployed
Yeah,
figures.
yeah,
And if they make them stay on at school till they're 18, unless they can prove they've got a job, which is what they did with Lewis, but he decided to go to university. If you hadn't got a job to go to, you had to stay on in school after 16. But if you could prove that you'd got a job, maybe it doesn't matter what it was, as long as you had a job, you could leave school. And that's ridiculous. There should be jobs for they're not children at 18. You know, you can't treat them like, oh, you have to stay at school. Well,
yeah,
if you
yeah.
choose to go to uni, then that's what you have to do. But it is
Well,
a different in the old when I was at school, it was different. If you were in the sixth form, you were in a higher echelon. You had, you know, you do all different blazes, you ate in a different, you know, they
yeah,
were it was a grammar school and they were breeding them for the high ranks in life, I suppose. Whereas us mere mortals just sat in the canteen, whereas they had their own, you know,
yeah, yeah,
bullshit.
yeah.
But anyway, that showed me the class divide right away, right from my
Yes, yes,
school days.
absolutely. Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. But you know, I think you're right that the demise of things like apprenticeships, like technical colleges as well.
Yeah.
You know, the idea that you could, you know, I said it on Twitter, you know, the world's always going to need plumbers and carpenters and
Yeah.
builders and car mechanics.
Car mechanics, yeah.
You know, there's all sorts of skilled professions that we still need in 2024. And we're going to need people to do them. And my only hope is that we do still get enough people to do those jobs and they don't potentially waste their time going to university to get a degree that won't get them any more
Hmm.
status or remuneration than if they didn't bother and they went for another profession instead.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So we'll move on to or return rather to the subject of identity politics. So middle of page 99 now, and I quote again from the book: for members of the various identity groups themselves who happen to enjoy some degree of wealth or privilege, identity politics provides an opportunity, one that many seem only too willing to take, to posture as though they don't possess these things, thereby allowing them to win favour within a movement that increasingly elevates victimhood and rights over agency and duty. This in turn has meant that the concept of organising across the labour movement in pursuit of winning advances for the common good seems to have been supplanted by an attitude that persuades individuals, regardless of their personal circumstances, to see themselves as victims through being members of a particular marginalised group, and then expect some benevolent middle class saviours or the state to come to their aid. And it's what this reminded me of was a tweet. I went back into the Paul Embery Twitter archives for this, and I remember this clear as day because it was one of the moments that made me realise what a dreadful trade union bureaucrat Dr. Joe Grady is. And it was in 2020 where Paul Embery wrote this tweet, and I'm going to quote the tweet. Very short, but it says, "Remember the days when the left saw class as the main divide in society?" That was the question that Paul Embery put. And in response to this, trade union bureaucrat Dr. Joe Grady, who is the alleged general secretary of the Universities and College Union, said this. She said, and I quote, "We don't build movements or organise to win like this. Those who view the struggles of women, LGBTQ plus or disabled people, migrants or BAME communities as secondary have no place in our movement. This isn't just politics. It reveals how they value politics. It's their political praxis." And again, Paul Embery said very clearly, do you remember when the left used to look at class as being the main division within society? And then Grady comes back with, people who view the struggles of women, LGBTQ plus or disabled migrants or BME communities as secondary. He didn't say that.
No.
What he said was, essentially, was the overarching principle must be that we are not divided necessarily by our sex or our race or our religion. We're divided by our class.
Correct.
And it's our class that also should be the one unifying factor over and above all those considerations.
Yeah.
To say that you don't discuss the considerations of how certain things affect working class women or working class black people or working class Muslim people or whatever. It's that in the final analysis, you're all working class. And predominantly, that's all that should matter in everything you do.
We've said, this is what we've said from the beginning of this book, and this is what we've said since we met each other in our political journey, I suppose, was that it was all about class. It's not about groups of people who feel maligned by some other group. But that's what the ruling class would have us do. He's never said, he's just said that the main divide in society should be based on class.
Yeah.
Simple statements.
Yeah.
Do you remember when it was like this? Because I do, and you do, and he obviously does. But I don't know how old she is, Dr. Joe Grady. I don't know if you know, but if she's our age or my age or your age, I wouldn't know. I don't even know what she looks like. But she's obviously an idiot. And to say that that's what he meant, that's just like building it up to let's have another argument and let's see, he'll have another go at Embery for being a bigot. Because he's picked on all these people now and injured them, hurt them because he said nasty things and they're all crying in the corner. Well, they're not.
No.
They couldn't give no shit about Embery.
Well,
no more than they could about anybody else.
Just to clarify, Joe Grady was born on the 7th of April 1984, according to her Wikipedia page.
Right, okay.
So she's 40.
She's old enough to know better.
Exactly. Yeah, I was going to say that's no excuse, you know. But you know, if that, I mean, look, I'm not a big fan of the University and Colleges Union, partly because they totally abandoned Kathleen Stock when she was suffering at the hands of activists at the University of Sussex, and they basically hung her out to dry.
Yeah.
And I'm not a fan of Joe Grady. I was at the Durham Miners Gala, I think it was 2 years ago, when she spoke. And I've got to be honest, the last few years, the Durham Miners Gala has had some of the crappiest speakers you could ever have picked to talk to working class people, honestly. But anyway, put that to one side. I wanted to get that out there. But anyway, Joe Grady talked, and she basically made the whole speech about herself. The whole speech about herself, chucked in a little bit at the beginning about her dad being a miner. You know, she wants to give the impression she's got earthy working class roots and all that rubbish. And then just prattled on about herself for the rest of the whatever it was. Felt like an eternity, but I'm sure it was no more than about 5 or 10 minutes.
Mm.
And this goes back to the identity politics thing, because let's be honest, if it was all about organising people along class lines, people like Joe Grady would be absolutely screwed, because she's basically, and a lot of the people her union represents have been grifting for years on identity politics, haven't they?
Mm.
You know, I mean, I mentioned just now about the University of Sussex, arguably the most woke university in the country.
Yeah.
You know, um, but the real danger is that the university and academia, sorry, even generally, are inculcating young people with this identity politics garbage, aren't they?
Yeah.
And they're going to go out into the big world believing that we are divided by our sex and our race and our religion, and
Mm.
not that we're divided by our class. And that's really worrying, you know.
Yes. But
For me, it's a concern, because, you know, I mean, obviously, these might not be people we need to rely on come the revolution.
I shouldn't think so. But the leadership of the unions is lacking. We've said this before.
Yeah.
All unions, not just this crap union, but all unions on this particular issue of ID politics, or women's rights, whatever it might be. They're divided, and they're divided against the average. See, you're right what you say. If I was to go out after this for a pint to where we went and sit down, no one would come to me and say, "Hey, did you hear that woman talking about identity politics the other? Or did you hear her talking about LGBTQ2 rights?" And they wouldn't. They'd slag me for being a United fan or whatever, and we'd have a football banter, and we'd talk about some, yeah, pub talk, just social
Yeah,
thing. But we
exactly.
wouldn't talk about
But
all these things that
well,
they bring up.
think about this though. You know, if you was to say be let's say a trade union branch meeting back in the, I don't know, the mid-70s. So you're at a trade union branch, and some new member comes in and says, "Oh, I've got this idea. I don't think we're really divided so much by class. We're divided more by certain characteristics. You know, like our sex or our religion or our color of our skin and all that sort of thing." He'd probably get laughed at
Hmm.
by a 1970s branch meeting. In fact, I dare say there would have been one or two people there say, "Look, mate, if you're in this room with us, you're working class. That's it. That's all that matters."
Hmm.
You know, we know that there's different sexes. We know there are different religions. We know there are different races. But in this room, we're all brothers and sisters.
I'd say you're right. After the Equal Pay Act, prior to the Equal Pay Act, which was what, 74? Was it 74?
Yeah, I believe so.
75?
Yeah.
Um, I represented about 400 men, maybe 250 women, and the divide at meetings. Most women didn't go to the branch meetings, but then again, most men didn't go to the branch meetings either. but, but there was some that went, and some that got involved in the union and that. And there was a bit of a divide between men and women in the old days, but whereas it was like women were only at work for pin money, for extras for the family. They shouldn't be, some bigoted. But
Yes.
gradually, as the Equal Pay Act came in and we changed our agreements, and I pushed forward the equality of the grades and all that caper, it it was acceptable then. But I would say prior to the early to mid 70s, I would say prior, in my experience, there was a divide between men and women, but there certainly wasn't a divide between black and white.
Yeah, exactly. Well, in fact, he touches on in the very next part of the chapter that we're going to look at. So, on page 100, Embery moves on to look at the phenomenon of this so-called white privilege that we were talking about earlier on.
Yeah.
And that's obviously the notion that people, regardless of their status or class, possess either advantages or disadvantages derived fundamentally from the color of their skin. And a quote from the chapter as follows: In 2018, for example, the BBC was looking for a trainee multimedia journalist to work on its Radio 1 Newsbeat show. In its advert for the job, the corporation made clear that whites should not apply. It wished to provide a pathway into journalism specifically for a person of colour. What this meant, of course, was that a young, poor, white working class person living in a deprived part of Britain who may have possessed genuine talent and dreamt of a career in journalism was excluded from applying on the grounds that he was somehow more advantaged than, say, a middle class Asian who had been to university and was the offspring of wealthy parents. And this is this comes back to the point that you touched on just a moment ago, which is the idea of putting someone in a role for any other reason than merit.
Mm.
If you put someone in a role for any reason other than merit, you undermine them from minute one. From the very first moment their bum touches the chair, they're undermined by the people above them, because there will always be a sense that they were not put there because of their talent and their suitability for the role. It was for another reason.
Mm.
And you know, and again, I'm going to say the point again, is the idea that the left makes no distinction between an Asian who owns the means of production and the Asian who works to sell his labour. As far as they're concerned, they're all one and the same.
Mm.
And that's evidenced here. You know, this is the idea that, you know, they want to employ someone who's of an Asian background or a non-white background. I don't think they were being specific about it being Asian. They just wanted someone from a non-white background, which meant someone who would have potentially more of a privileged upbringing and possibly with a university education, but had the right skin color, would get a job.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a sign of the times, isn't it? And that sort of thing doesn't seem to be showing any signs of abating either, is it? I mean, he's talking about 2018, we're in 2024. And I don't see any sign of this. And the development of diversity, equality, and inclusion as well in workplaces.
Yeah, well, that's all the point we're saying. We're just using the fact that he's talked about a black as opposed to white, and that's what we're saying. It's if you positively discriminate, that, in my opinion, is not fair. It's not based on merit.
No,
it is actually based on skin color.
And you know, again, when you look at certain pieces of research that show that of all the things that you are likely to be discriminated against for, one of the most pervasive ones is your class. Class is one of the reasons why you will be discriminated against, over and above some other characteristics, it has to be said. You know, you're basically setting certain people up to lose straight from the beginning, aren't you, when you open recruitment campaigns of this nature?
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move on. Page 104, and I quote: "On the other hand, the modern left, is, when it suits, only too willing to see minority groups as uniform slabs, devoid of individuality, and then to enlist these groups as collective entities, even when many within them hold a completely conflicted worldview. These contradictions mean that, for example, when Muslim parents protested against the teaching of LGBT equality in schools, as they did in Birmingham in 2019, much of the left found itself found itself afflicted by a cognitive dissonance and isn't sure which way to turn." And I suppose the problem that Embery identifies here is that you have in the left's view, a victimized minority being taught about another victimized minority, but the first victimized minority doesn't want their children taught about the second victimized minority, and the left then is stuck. It doesn't know where to go.
Exactly.
Because if that was a group of white people and white parents saying we don't want our kids taught LGBT plus, the answer for the left is simple: they're bigots.
They're racist.
They're
yes,
bigots.
Bigots.
Yeah, they're bigots, right? They're bigots. They're homophobes. They're transphobes. They're this phobe. They're that phobe. Nice and easy. but they don't want to pin labels on Muslims because they have always seen Muslims as a downtrodden minority group. So they're left in this quandary, and most of the time they end up not saying anything because they've got nowhere to go with it. They can't go anywhere. They, whatever way they stand, they'll end up having or end up attacking one or other of the two.
One or the other, yeah.
They say nothing. They fall down in the middle.
Yes, which shows that their views are false, phony.
Yeah, exactly. And as I said in my notes, it's not solely an issue with the modern left. I think people from all over the political spectrum have a tendency to club groups in together. I mean, how often these days do you hear the word community used when to describe a collective of people?
Yeah.
Be it the Muslim community, the LGBTQ plus community. I'm trying to think of other communities, but anyway, those two will do as examples. You know, in some way implying that every Muslim knows every other Muslim. Every LGBTQ plus person's got the number of every other LGBTQ plus person, you know. There is a tendency, and it's done on the left and the right, excuse me, to put people together into huge monolithic lumps, isn't it? Just like one great big group of people, and forgetting, for instance, that there are lots of gay right-wing people. There are lots of lesbian right-wing people. That you know, they're not all of the left just because they're in this group.
Exactly. They don't get it though.
No, they don't. And the problem with the left, as I said in my notes, the problem with the left is that by creating these pseudo communities, they ignore the fact that they aren't homogenous groups, and they do have disparate spread of beliefs and disparate spread of political affiliations and so on. And that brings us to the end of this part of our book review of Paul Embery's book, Despised, Why the Modern Left Loathes the Working Class. It's by Polity Books. It's available on Amazon and all good bookshops. And I urge you to buy this book and read it. It's a very, very good, interesting read, even if you don't or may not necessarily agree with everything that's in it. We'll be back again soon with another part in our book review of Paul Embery's book, Despised. But for now, thanks for joining me and goodbye. Solidarity.